Hey, what's up, people? Pizowell here, and today I want to talk to you guys about 1986's Big Trouble in Little China. Now, this is partially going to be a review of the movie as well as a review of this new Scream Factory 2-disc Collector's Edition Blu-ray release, or in this case, the limited edition Steelbook release. And I hardly know where to begin with Big Trouble in Little China. I don't want to bore you guys with a plot synopsis. I'm going to assume that at least 85% of you guys out there have already seen this film, and the 15% of you that haven't at least know of Big Trouble in Little China. And there is so much for us to sink our teeth into on this Blu-ray release. This Blu-ray release is absolutely loaded, but I would be remiss if I didn't spend at least a little bit of time talking about the film and why I love it and how much I love Big Trouble in Little China. I've loved this movie going all the way back to the first time I saw it as a kid, long before I even knew that it was a John Carpenter film. Big Trouble in Little China simply has it all. This is a kung fu, action, adventure, creature feature, ghost story, and more. It's as if John Carpenter threw all of these genres into a blender, hit puree, and then added a heaping helping of tongue-in-cheek satire. And I truly believe that Big Trouble in Little China is one of the best movies of the 1980s. I think it was a film that was way ahead of its time, and I think it's a movie that doesn't get the credit that it deserves for just how smartly written it is and how expertly executed it is on virtually every level. And one of the many things I love about Big Trouble in Little China is the character of Jack Burton, brilliantly portrayed by Kurt Russell. And in the beginning of Big Trouble in Little China, they set up the Jack Burton character as your archetypal leading man hero, the John Wayne, red-blooded American man's man who is going to overcome every obstacle in his path and do it with a smirk on his face and, a quippy one-liner. He's going to get the girl in the end and ride off into the sunset with her. Only not so much, because Big Trouble in Little China takes that leading man, hero archetype and really turns it upside down. Because Jack Burton is a bumbling, blowhard buffoon. A lovable, bumbling, blowhard buffoon, but a bumbling, blowhard buffoon nonetheless. And Kurt Russell's performance as Jack Burton is just absolutely mesmerizing to watch, because he plays it almost as if Jack Burton is in his own movie, in his head, and he's oblivious to just how serious things are around him. He stumbles into these fantastical situations and then stumbles his way out of them in one piece, oblivious to the fact that the only reason he's stumbling out of these situations in one piece is because of good old-fashioned luck and because of an assist from his friend Wang, played by Dennis Dunn. Jack Burton is not the hero of Big Trouble in Little China, even though I'm sure he thinks he is. The hero of this film is actually Wang, Dennis Dunn's character. Now, I could go into detail about all the other elements of this film that I love, because I love pretty much every element of this film. This is an exceptionally well-made film. The cinematography is great. The pacing is spot on. The action sequences are phenomenal. The creature effects, the makeup effects, the old school visual effects are all great. Even today, even under the scrutiny of high definition, they hold up. They still look really good. The cast from top to bottom: Kurt Russell, Kim Cattrall, Dennis Dunn, James Hong, who plays Lo Pan in this film, just delivers a classic performance as Lo Pan, this 2,000-year-old ghost who, even though he's been around for 2,000 years, has not lost his sense of humor. And the back and forth between him and Jack Burton in this movie is just fantastic. Again, this is just such a smartly written film. W.D. Richter, who wrote and directed the awesome Buckaroo Banzai, rewrote this screenplay. John Carpenter does a phenomenal job directing this movie. I cannot think of a single flaw in Big Trouble in Little China. I think this is one of the best movies of the 80s. I think it was way ahead of its time. It was a huge failure at the box office back in the day, but it is a movie that has accumulated a cult following over the years. However, I really don't hear a lot of people talking about Big Trouble in Little China, even when they're discussing John Carpenter's career. Big Trouble in Little China kind of flies under the radar, which is just really unfortunate. This is a great, awesome, fun, highly entertaining, just an awesome movie. If you've not seen Big Trouble in Little China, by all means, go and watch Big Trouble in Little China. This Blu-ray release from Scream Factory would be a great way to introduce yourself to the film. If you are a fan of Big Trouble in Little China, you definitely want to look into picking up this release and adding it to your collection. First, let's take a look at the presentation. This Steelbook release features some really awesome artwork. I'll open it up so you guys can see the artwork in its entirety. But check that out. That is very, very cool. Now, just a couple of days ago, I did an unboxing of the entire Scream Factory Big Trouble in Little China bundle that came with the collector's edition Blu-ray release, the limited edition Steelbook, the poster, the lithograph, and the vinyl soundtrack. So I'll post a link to that video around here somewhere. Go check that out. But really nice artwork on this Steelbook. Inside there, it's all in the reflexes. There is disc 1, the feature film, and here is disc 2 with low pan on it. That is all the bonus materials. But yeah, just a really cool Steelbook release for Big Trouble in Little China from the fine folks over at Scream Factory. Really nice stuff. As far as the picture quality and sound quality are concerned, this release doesn't note any kind of new transfer or elaborate restoration. Still, I thought the picture quality on this release was really good. I would give it a solid 4 out of 5. Same with the audio quality. I thought the audio quality was fantastic. I would give it a solid 4 or even a 4.5 out of 5. So you've got really good picture quality and good sound quality on this release. As far as extras are concerned, first up, we have You're the Hero with actor Dennis Dunn. It's 14 minutes and 14 seconds in length. Mr. Dunn discusses catching the acting bug early on and getting cast in Michael Cimino's Year of the Dragon. He discusses auditioning for John Carpenter for a role in Big Trouble in Little China. He discusses working with John Carpenter and James Hong. He discusses the film's legacy and how fortunate he feels to have been a part of Big Trouble in Little China, and more. Next up, we have The Soul of Lo Pan with actor James Hong. It's 23 minutes and 57 seconds in length. Mr. Hong discusses growing up in Minnesota, the lesson Gene Wilder taught him about always adapting as an actor. He discusses moving to LA in his early career. He discusses auditioning for John Carpenter. Mr. Hong shares stories from the set of Big Trouble in Little China, including almost getting hurt on an escalator and how they made Lo Pan float in the film. He discusses working with FX artist Steve Johnson and the makeup process for creating Lo Pan, and more. Next up, we have Able to Be Myself with actor Donald Lee. It's 18 minutes and 29 seconds in length. Mr. Lee discusses his early career in theater and television. He discusses being mesmerized by actors like Marlon Brando and Robert De Niro, who inspired him to become an actor. He discusses auditioning for John Carpenter. He discusses how he didn't really have to act to play Eddie Lee because he basically was that character. He discusses working with Kurt Russell, Dennis Dunn, and Victor Wong. He discusses working with John Carpenter. He discusses the film's legacy, and more. Next up, we have The Dao of Thunder with actor Carter Wong. It's 25 minutes and 47 seconds in length. He discusses his youth and martial arts training and being trained by an 80-year-old Grand Master and the different Shaolin martial arts techniques he was trained in. He discusses his early career as an actor and working for John Woo and acting in 50 films for the Golden Harvest Company. He discusses moving to the U.S. and training law enforcement in martial arts techniques and getting cast in Year of the Dragon. He discusses getting cast in Big Trouble in Little China and working with John Carpenter, Kurt Russell, and James Hong. He discusses Thunder's demise in the film and the makeup process that sequence required, and much more. Next up, we have The Dao of Rain with actor Peter Kwong. It's 28 minutes and 34 seconds in length. Mr. Kwong discusses his youth as a dancer and competing in dance contests. He discusses getting involved in theater and martial arts while in college. He discusses the different martial arts styles that he studied. He discusses the racial stereotyping of Asian actors in Hollywood. He discusses auditioning for John Carpenter and landing the role of Rain and the use of martial arts in the film. He discusses how fun and creatively rewarding working on Big Trouble in Little China was, and more. Next up, we have The Hatchet Man Speaks with actor Al Leong. It's 6 minutes and 32 seconds in length. Mr. Leong discusses moving from St. Louis to L.A. and his background in martial arts. He discusses getting cast in Big Trouble in Little China in a very unique way and what a great person and director John Carpenter is. Next up, we have Damn Willie Prescott and the Horse He Rode In On with writer W.D. Richter. It's 20 minutes and 31 seconds in length. Mr. Richter discusses getting the gig to rewrite the script, which was originally a Western set in the late 1900s Gaslight era. He discusses the writing process and just kind of winging it, and how much fun he had writing the Jack Burton character. He discusses knowing John Carpenter from film school and being pleased when he was brought on to direct. He discusses the film's lukewarm release, the film finding its audience over time, and the legacy of Big Trouble in Little China, and more. Next up, we have It Was a Western Ghost Story with writer Gary Goldman. It's 27 minutes and 50 seconds in length. Mr. Goldman discusses the inception of Big Trouble in Little China and setting it during the late 1900s. He discusses the writing process, collaborating with co-writer David Weinstein, and shares many details of the story that remain in the updated version of Big Trouble in Little China. He discusses selling the script, how selling the screenplay saved him from having to go to law school, and how he and Weinstein left the project. He reflects on the differences between the original script and the finished film, and much more. Next up, we have The Poetry of Motion with martial arts choreographer James Liu. It's 35 minutes and 1 second in length. Mr. Liu discusses his childhood and being inspired to study martial arts by Bruce Lee. He discusses the different martial arts techniques he trained in while growing up. He discusses auditioning for Kung Fu the series and using the money he made from Kung Fu to open his own Kung Fu School. He discusses meeting with John Carpenter, to storyboard the fight sequences and designing the weapons for the film. He discusses working with John Carpenter and the climactic fight sequences in the third act of the film and how those fight sequences were accomplished. He discusses winning an Emmy as a stunt coordinator for the Luke Cage series, and more. Next up, we have Into the Mystic Night with Coupe de Ville's member Nick Castle. It's 12 minutes and 35 seconds in length. Mr. Castle discusses growing up with a father who was a dance choreographer in Hollywood and his love of music and singing. He discusses attending USC and first meeting John Carpenter. He discusses the formation of the Coupe de Villes with Carpenter and Tommy Lee Wallace and creating the end credits song for A Big Trouble in Little China, and more. Next up, we have Since We Were Kids with second unit director and Coupe de Ville's member Tommy Lee Wallace. It's 28 minutes and 51 seconds in length. Mr. Wallace discusses how his love of music came first before his love of film. He discusses his friendship with John Carpenter and attending USC Film School. He discusses bonding with Carpenter over music and playing music with Carpenter in their hometown of Bowling Green, Kentucky. He discusses the formation of the Coupe de Villes at USC with Carpenter and Nick Castle. He discusses getting the gig as second unit director on Big Trouble in Little China and his duties as second unit director. He discusses writing and performing the end credit music with the Coupe de Villes and the making of the music video for the song, and more. Next up, we have Love and Art with movie poster artist Drew Struzan at 17 minutes and 4 seconds in length. Mr. Struzan discusses his difficult upbringing and how he was able to get a full ride to art school based on his ability to draw. He discusses getting work designing album art for artists such as Alice Cooper. He discusses painting the posters for Star Wars and the painting process for creating the Big Trouble in Little China poster, and more. Drew Struzan is just a prodigious artist for movie posters. Just Google his name and check out all of the posters that he created. Just mind-blowing. Next up, we have Return to Little China with John Carpenter. It's 12 minutes and 14 seconds in length. Mr. Carpenter discusses getting offered the job to direct Big Trouble in Little China and his love of kung fu movies. He discusses how the studio wanted Indiana Jones but got Big Trouble instead. He discusses how the studio was upset with him over the fact that Jack Burton wasn't a traditional movie hero and because of the humor in the film. He discusses his friendship with Kurt Russell and how much he loved working with Kim Cattrall. He discusses the process of creating the score and creating the song for the end credit sequence. He discusses the film's cult status, and more. Next up, we have Being Jack Burton with Kurt Russell. It's 20 minutes and 57 seconds in length. Mr. Russell discusses getting cast as Elvis in the Elvis TV movie and working with John Carpenter. He discusses how Carpenter fought for him to play Snake Plissken in Escape from New York, and Carpenter asking him to be in The Thing. He discusses the character of Jack Burton and wanting to play him like a bumbling John Wayne. He discusses working with Kim Cattrall and Dennis Dunn. He discusses the studio head not liking Big Trouble in Little China and the movie being buried by the studio, only to find its audience over the years, and more. Next up, we have Carpenter and I with cinematographer Dean Cundey. It's 15 minutes and 38 seconds in length. Mr. Cundey discusses what impressed him about working with John Carpenter on Halloween. He discusses Halloween 2 and 3, The Fog, Escape from New York, and The Thing. He discusses his enthusiasm for shooting Big Trouble in Little China and working again with John Carpenter and Kurt Russell. He discusses how fond he is of all the films he worked on with John Carpenter, and more. Next up, we have Producing Big Trouble with producer Larry Franco. It's 15 minutes and 21 seconds in length. Mr. Franco discusses first meeting John Carpenter on Elvis, the movie, and becoming fast friends with him. He discusses becoming collaborators with John Carpenter on first the Elvis movie and then The Fog, Escape from New York, and so on as Carpenter's producer. He discusses casting the three Storms in Big Trouble. He discusses his role as producer on the film. He discusses the falling out with the studio and how it soured Carpenter to working with studios, and more. Next up, we have Staging Big Trouble with stuntman Jeff Amada. It's 12 minutes and 29 seconds in length. Mr. Amada discusses his martial arts background, working as an actor and stuntman. He discusses how he got involved in Big Trouble in Little China, the fight sequences, and how some of them were staged. He discusses working with Kurt Russell, Dennis Dunn, and James Hong. He discusses how honored he was to become Carpenter's go-to stunt coordinator, and more. Next up, we have visual effects artist Richard Edlund. It's 13 minutes and 25 seconds in length. Mr. Edlund discusses the makeup effects for Lo Pan, the floating eyeball monster design, the sewer monster, and the wild man, and more. Next up, we have a vintage featurette, which is 7 minutes and 26 seconds in length, which features on-set interviews with Kurt Russell, John Carpenter, Dennis Dunn, Kim Cattrall, James Hong, Richard Edlund, and costume designer April Ferry. We get theatrical trailers, TV spots, the electronic press kit, we get a gag reel, deleted scenes, the extended ending, we get photo galleries, we get the music video for the Coupe de Villes, the song that plays at the end of Big Trouble in Little China, over the credits, and it's a pretty interesting music video. We get a vintage audio interview with John Carpenter, and we get 3 commentary tracks on this release. One with producer Larry Franco, moderated by Justin Beam, one with Steve Johnson, and one with John Carpenter and Kurt Russell. This is an absolutely loaded Blu-ray release for Big Trouble in Little China from the folks over at Scream Factory. You've got good picture quality and sound quality on this release. You've got a ton of new and old extras, new commentaries, old commentaries. This is just a jam-packed release for Big Trouble in Little China. Again, if you've not seen the film, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. This Blu-ray release would be a great way to introduce yourself to the film. If you're a fan of Big Trouble in Little China, you definitely want to look into picking up this release and adding it to your collection. If you've seen Big Trouble in Little China, please let me know your thoughts on it down in the comments section below. If you picked up this release, either the standard collector's edition or the Steelbook, please let me know your thoughts on them down in the comments section below. If you like this video, please leave it a thumbs up. If you're not following me on social media, those links are in the description. They're also right around here. As always, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Take care, and until next time, peace. Join the $1 a month club and help support my channel on Patreon. Thank you to my current patrons, Kevin Smythe, B-Movie Mike, Robert Sobel, Turi Delamore, Stephen Flanagan, Lori Holt, Craig Farrand, Farron Sutton, Jeremiah Lambert, Grindhouse Grotto, Derek Jana, Demon Waffles, Simon Clark, Stone Gassman, Zachary Barton, Lorne Dixon, James Welch, Eli Geisler, Jeff Overing, Pete Toll, Kyle McGuire, Jay the Stingray, Andrew McDonald, Dave Barnes, Jonathan Lundy, Chris Gonzalez, The R-Rated Show, Fear Fuel, Jason Breitenbach, Brandon Bisdick, Steak Sauce, Mark Striano, Jeff Gardner, Travis Davis, The Obsoletionist, Chris Earls, Kevin Fitzpatrick, Randall Beatty, Joseph Hinkle, Hey Isn't That Devon Graham, Christian Hannah Horror, and Jacob Green. Say hello to the internet, Jeremy.
Hello to the internet.